So, good afternoon, a formal beginning. Very thankful to be here, and thank you to Canny and to the Linen Hall Library, and also to all of you who came out here to join me today exploring this topic that is so important to me and dear to me. As you can see on the screen, we're looking at two vases from the Archaic period, and they were by the Athenian potter and painter Exekias. The one on the left you might have seen before is a very celebrated vase depicting Achilles and Ajax playing a board game in full battle gear. And we know the identities of these two figures because the artist has inscribed their names alongside them. You might not be able to see it, but if you were to look very closely, you could see Achilles and Ajax kind of running alongside the backs of the warriors. And while these inscriptions clearly identify them as figures from the heroic mythic age, their arms and armor reflect Exekias's own archaic Greek period. So for him, it would be 6th century BC. And the depiction of these two iconic Trojan War heroes in period armor offers us a unified image of myth and history. So history and myth as an eternal now. The Trojan War heroes in period armor, right? They're from one age, but the armor is telling us another one. And the warriors are then both specific and general, embodied in warriors across time. They are, Ajax and Achilles, the heroic precedent. Whenever men go to war, they are embodying this precedent. And thus we might say that the heroes are immortal in the sense that they're eternally present in every living, full of excitement today, in every man who goes to war. In the image on the other side, we have a similar fusion of myth and history, slightly perhaps lesser known vase, also by Exekias. Based on the imagery, this one is depicting a marriage scene. The wreaths, again, whether you can see them, you might not be able to, but on the heads of the couple are wreaths, and that identifies them as bride and groom. And the grouping of the figures with the horses facing forward, there's a young boy or man leading the procession, and this indicates to us that it's a marriage procession, which occurred also during Exekias' time. So this would have been a procession would have been part of the marriage ritual, even in his own time. There are, however, also some mythic elements. As you can see, the man and the woman are on a chariot. In historical time, they probably would have been riding a cart. We have a bearded man in the center holding a kithara, which is a large lyre for professional performance. He tends to be associated with Apollo, but music and dance would have been part of a procession. It would have been a very raucous affair as the bride is being led to her husband's house. The general consensus, which is not to say that everyone agrees, but generally people think that this is depicting the marriage of Peleus and Thetis. Peleus being the mortal hero, Thetis being a goddess. So we're having a wedding between a mortal man and a goddess. And I think that's something we need to remember. And this is seen as a paradigmatic wedding. It's the wedding that we see depicted. And the reason we think it's Peleus and Thetis is because the imagery on this vase matches the imagery on vases where they're explicitly named as Peleus and Thetis. Here, however, we don't. And one of the theories is that this vase would have been a wedding present. So what happens by implying Peleus and Thetis, but not stating it as we have with Ajax and Achilles, we have a more general idea of marriage as a heroic endeavor. Not a specific marriage where we can start to maybe question and tear it, pick it apart, but generally, marriage itself is a means of achieving immortality because you create a new branch on your family tree and you bring new citizens into the world and they carry the story forward and then they get married and they have children. And so this cycle of marriage and children and family continues and continues and continues. And this is a form of immortality that is available to regular old mortals, right? To just any one of us. So the screen is blank, and I'm going to actually be quiet for about 10 seconds, because what I'd like you to do is take a minute to think about what you associate with glory. Any words, any images, any ideas. So don't be alarmed, but I'm going to stand quietly for about 15 seconds. Okay, that was 15. Did it feel interminably long? People get very nervous when there's silence. So now, I'm not going to make you tell me what you thought about glory, but I will be interested to hear later at the question period, hopefully. But the word that we use in Homer, that we see in Homer for glory, is kleos. And this word comes from the verb kluo, which means to hear, and especially to hear willingly. And I think this is something very important, because there's an idea that the speaker and the receiver are coming together intentionally. They're choosing to be there. It's not that you're just overhearing something, it's that you're really participating in something. And kleos specifically is glory in terms of what is heard. It's reputation carried by speech, picked up by the receiver, carried forward. So what you hear about somebody willingly. Yes, okay, good. So this is important, because kleos is not an idea, it's not an abstraction. It is something that is produced by song. It's produced in time, in real time. It's an event, it's a performance. If you can't read the text, don't worry, I'm going to make the slides available to everybody. There's a famous formula in Homer, kleos aphthiton, imperishable fame, and this is the fame of heroes. Their fame is imperishable. And this word, imperishable, is intentionally, I think, connected to the physical world and the way that leaves they bloom and then they fall, and then the trees rest and then they reproduce, and that cycle. So fame is like that as well. It is imperishable, but only as long as there's a community to continue the song. And again, I really want to emphasize, this is a spoken fame. You cannot have kleos without somebody to sing it, to repeat it. It's not internal, it's not visual, it's not moral. So you can be famous for something, and it's not necessarily something that other people want to repeat, but it still makes you famous. We see this in the modern world a lot, don't we? Fame is acoustic, it's social, and it's collective. And I cannot emphasize this enough, you need an audience, you need a receiver, you need transmission, you need memory. And who's going to do that remembering? We'll get there. For right now, I want to just say, okay, we've talked about kleos, which is what we have in myth, which is a story about the past, a linear story. It happens in one place, it ends further down the line. It happens outside of context. Anybody, if they can speak Greek and they can hear the song, can take it and do something with it. And that is what we call the Panhellenic element of the mythological world. It's a story grounded in particular gods and heroes, and it can be told anywhere in the Greek world. Ritual, on the other hand, is also memory, but it's embodied memory. So it's something that you live, hopefully the vase, we're thinking about our vases, and we're thinking about how any warrior, any couple that's getting married is living what the heroes experienced. So it's a lived experience, it's performed in real time, it's context dependent. You are in a particular time and space, and that time and place matters. Again, if we think about Exikias's vases, he's painting the warriors in the armor of his own time. So if we were going to do something likewise, we would depict warriors wearing whatever the army of our nation is. So specific, happening in a particular moment, and also repeating, because every time the song is performed, it's invoked all over again, and It's this idea that by speaking, we make reality. We speak reality into existence. So speech, very important. And while myth might seem, we might associate it with elitist endeavors, male-oriented endeavors, ritual is female-oriented and communal. And we can hear women's voices most audibly, it has been argued, in ritual. And one of the reasons that we have a hard time hearing their voices is because we don't do these rituals anymore. We only have in some cases, very vague notions of what these rituals were. So the meaning of the myths is dependent on the rituals that embody them, that enact them, but all we have is the first part. All we have is the myth. And I would say this is one of the reasons that we really struggle. To understand. This is one of the reasons that we struggle to understand really what's going on with the women. This is does anyone recognize this painting? Yeah, Escher's hand-drawing hand, yeah. So myth and ritual are sort of like that. On the one hand, maybe the myths that we have of Homer are holding some memory of an earlier ritual, but they're also connected to rituals that are recreated in the classical and archaic periods and so on. So which is the chicken and which is the egg, right? Which is the hand that's drawing the hand is the question, yeah. So just a little primer so that when you go off and you're interested, hopefully, in doing some more research, you'll have some things to seize on. Women's work, every time people encounter it for the first time in Homer, they might say like, oh, there's women just having to do, I think I saw it recently described as homely domestic tasks. But these quote-unquote homely domestic tasks are actually also ritual tasks. So all the things that we see women doing in Homer and that we see women doing in real life, in the classical world and the archaic world, were also things that they did in service to the gods. So we might think, oh, it's just a bunch of girls down by the river in the Odyssey washing clothes, of course, because they're girls and they have to wash clothes. But actually, washing was a form of purification that you would do before you participated in a ritual. It's also something that was done to the sacred statue of Athena in Athens once a year, and it was the women who washed the statue, who dressed it in the clean clothes. And women were also the weavers of the garment for Athena. And this is really important work. So we could think of all the weaving that women are doing in their daily lives is also preparing them to weave in the most important occasion, which is the annual, cyclically repeating, Panathenaea, the festival for Athena. Baking, grinding grain and baking, they would need to bake bread, sometimes in rather provocative shapes for some of the festivals that they participated in. So three at the underneath Panathenaea, the Thesmophoria, the Heloa, and the Adonia were all women-only festivals. So this idea that women were kind of hidden away and they never got to go out is perhaps a male fantasy. We want to believe, right? Maybe they wanted to believe that they were controlling the women, but actually the women would probably say they were controlling the situation, because without them, the goddesses especially, would not be worshipped correctly. So baking bread would have been a requirement for the offerings that they were making.
So, can I ask, what is that? Is that a large rat? Or
It's a piglet. It's a piglet.
Pig?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these were also sacrificed, but maybe I should have picked a different. They were.
Sorry.
This was an offering that was made to Demeter. Yeah. But I want to talk about one other really important way that we, I think, almost always overlook, which is that in every single house there would have been a hearth, a fire. And this fire would have been kept eternally lit, at least in the lifespan of that household. And it was the women who were charged with keeping the fires. So keeping the home fires burning, right? We've seen that, maybe heard that expression. This, again, very serious and a sacred duty, and also a service to Hestia, which is the word for hearth, and it's also the word for the goddess of the hearth, who is capital H, Hestia, right? So the home is the sanctuary, and we think about this metaphorically, but in ancient Greece, would they not have thought of it literally? That this is a sanctuary of the goddess Hestia. And everything that women did in their home would have been under the auspices of this goddess. They would also have sacrificed food and made libations before and after every meal. So the goddess is going to be very present in their daily lives. And I think in some ways we must then consider that the wife was the priestess of Hestia in her own home, and that her home was a sanctuary, a dwelling for the goddess, which, again, kind of transforms the homely domestic tasks to something a little bit more sacred. Now kind of segueing into Homer more, I think, directly. One of the ways that we see women elevated in Homer, I would say, is through the metaphor of the mother. And warriors, when they're in battle, or warriors when they're dealing with one another, will be compared to mothers. I've flagged 3, I would say, significant places. And I do want to talk about this because the mother here is being held up. And again, if we think about the mother, the goddess, or the priestess to the goddess in her own home, she is the paradigm for sacrificial love. And heroes, when they're protecting each other, are compared to mothers. In Iliad 16, Achilles makes the simile, but in a sort of inverted way. He says to Patroclus, "Why are you tearful, like an infant girl who runs after her mother, demanding to be picked up?" If that's not anybody who has children, right? That's just a eternal now, right? Grasping her dress and holds her back as she hurries and looks at her weeping, and she is picked up. We often read this as a piece of literature, and we say, oh, this is prophesying the fall of Troy and what is going to happen and how ironic. But there's another element to it where Achilles is putting himself in the position of the mother, and he's portraying himself as the mother of Patroclus. And we know that this is a very tragic image because Achilles will fail to protect Patroclus in the Iliad. And he will therefore fail at his maternal duty. He will fail to hold up that sacred, sacrificial love element. Another place that we see it, and oftentimes I have had students be really offended by this, Agamemnon is injured, and the bard gives us the simile, as when a sharp arrow of pain strikes a woman in the agony of childbirth, piercing pain, which the spirits attending birth pain send, daughters of Hera, so daughters of Hera send birth pains. And just like that was how Agamemnon's pain was like childbirth. And, right, women would be very, right, potentially like, I don't know about that. But this is really huge because the pain of Agamemnon is being compared to a mother's pain when she is giving birth to her daughter or son. So there's this implicit connection between warriors and mothers, and that they are both performing a protective role. The warriors are defending the city on the field of battle, and the women are defending the city inside through their prayers to the goddess, through their care, and through the risk they take to their own lives by giving birth and having more citizens. And then the last example is, I think, a very cute one, and mostly that's why I included it, because it's the 2 Ajaxes. Ajax the Greater. There's a moment in book 8 when he's got his giant shield, right, where he has like a wall size, a mini little wall. And his younger brother is darting out from behind the wall and shooting his arrows and then darting behind the shield again. And it's a very poignant image, but it's also telling us a lot about Ajax, because we will see that when the Greek ships are under threat, Ajax is the one who is, he's described as the bulwark of the Achaeans. So, and it's a terrible, terrible moment when he's weeping almost because he's terrified that he's not going to be able to save his comrades. So again, a beautiful and painful and tragic image where really Homer is making us feel for everybody. So I think Homer is putting us in a position almost of a mother with her children, right? Who we're seeing that one of them is going to lose. And we don't want anyone to lose because they're all suffering, and it's very sad. And it's amazing that Homer can do this, can make us feel this way. So, Hector and Andromache in the Iliad are our tragic family. Right? Things go wrong for them. Things go terribly wrong. In book 6, we have this scene, this farewell between the two of them on the walls of Troy. And this vase image, you can see, is not a scene from the epic, but it is giving us some of the tension in the epic, which is Andromache is seated, she's holding her little child, and he's reaching for the helmet, and that helmet is eventually going to be in the dirt when Hector is killed. And we kind of see the whole story in the image. And when we read it with the grain of our typical way of reading literature, and I want to emphasize this isn't a matter of right and wrong. It's not that reading with the grain, reading it as a piece of literature is wrong, because for us that's what it is, right? But if we're aware that what we're getting, this piece of literature, is just one slice of a whole, it will change how we think about it. But in order to get there, we have to be willing to read against the grain. We have to think about how are we reading this as literature, and then what if we don't think about it as literature? What if we see it connected to a bigger world? What if we think about speech as a way to create reality, right? To make the world over and over again. And so let's take a minute and think about that. On the one hand, we have Hector with the grain, right? Reading it as a piece of literature, we might say, oh, this is a conflict between family and heroism. Because family is not heroic, it's just family. So Andromache wants him to just be, she wants him to choose survival, she wants him to choose family, and he's choosing fame instead. And that's how we think about we might think about the conflict. If we think about it in terms of ritual, there's another important thing that happens in this section and several times, which is Andromache laments Hector. And lament is also a ritual act. It is something that's incorporated in different festivals. It's something that was part of funerals but was retracted, eventually made illegal. But it was made illegal in real funerals, but a space was made for it in ritual. So by ritualizing something, we can also control it. And it's not just that somebody outside of women is controlling them. It's also controlling emotions. It is channeling your emotions into a self-contained, into a controlled way so that they don't dominate you. So if grief is a god or goddess, is a divine force, by ritualizing it, we can control it, and we can make a space for it without letting it run away with us. And here in the Iliad, where it is the mythic age, right? It's linear time, he's going to have to die. It is fascinating that we see Andromache lament him, and what does lament do? It talks about her experience. She says, this is what's going to happen to me when you die. And it is a ritual form that is embedded in the epic. So in her performance of lament, she's restructuring her identity. She's making herself new from the wife of Hector to the widow of Hector, and we're seeing kind of a collision, I think, of war in the household, but also of the mythic identity and the ritual identity. And I know it's a little hard to see, but I think something that let me give you one other little moment from this to take it to the next level. Hector tells Andromache, don't grieve for me excessively, because I'm not going to die until it's my time. And when it's my time, there's nothing that I'm going to be able to do to avoid it. So you go to your own work, the loom and the distaff, and make all your women go to their work. So this, again, a with the grain reading, taking our own associations with women's work that we might have, and projecting them into the epic, will say he's dismissing her. He's telling her, go off to the house, go home, and do your own thing. Don't worry about me. War is the work of men. But if we read it with the grain, against the grain rather, what does Andromache do when she goes home? She raises a lament. And it's not just her lamenting, but it's all the women. She has them all lament for her. And so what Hector does is he takes her lament from the public sphere on the walls to the private sphere inside her home. And he contains her speech, but she reasserts her power by raising the lament in that moment that she returns home and taking it from just being her individual voice to being a communal voice. So we are kind of seeing the origin of epic in epic, which is quite extraordinary when you think about it. So in a way, what we're seeing is cyclical time inside linear time. So there's the hand drawing the hand again. Which came first? Yeah. Now, what's interesting about the Odyssey is that we don't actually have a linear narrative. Right. We're with Telemachus, and then we go and we find Odysseus, but he's at the very end of his travels. And then we have to unravel and then reweave. So the story of the Odyssey, the way the bard tells the story of the Odyssey, very much might remind us of Penelope, who weaves and unweaves. Again, it's an epic of such extraordinary design that it almost really boggles the mind, right? But we have this moment with Nausicaa and Odysseus when he's a meeting that is engineered by Athena, where Odysseus has finally been released by Calypso, and he's been traumatized by Poseidon, and he washes up on the shore of the island of the Phaeacians, and Athena comes to Nausicaa in a dream and says, you should really go and wash the clothes because you're going to be married soon and you need to start to really be responsible for these domestic tasks. Once again, we are thinking about domestic tasks as also being sacred, having a component of ritual. So this isn't just a little girl being sent to do the most boring thing that nobody wants to do. This is also, she's being prepared. She's undergoing an initiation. And what happens? Odysseus comes out, he's doesn't have any clothes left, he's covering himself with a branch, and he's compared to a lion, which is a very familiar simile in the Iliad. And but then he comes out, and it's not appropriate for him to be a lion because he's amongst young girls. And what happens? All the girls run away, except for Nausicaa. And she makes her stand opposite him, face to face, and he ponders. He stops to think. So what's happened here is the language that's used to describe Nausicaa is the language that's used to describe a duel in the Iliad. But now it's not a violent duel, but it is a young girl being confronted with a potential husband. She eventually, right, they have their conversation. It's beautiful, he gives a beautiful prayer to her, compares her to a goddess, and then she kind of orders her handmaiden. She says, why are you so, what are you worried about? Do you think he's dangerous? Come on, right? She's kind of rousing them, very much like, I want to emphasize, the leaders of the Achaeans to their men in the Iliad, right? So here's this young girl who we might think, oh, she's not important. It's just a plot device because we need to get Odysseus in, from the shore into the city. But she leads him in a procession where he's following in her footsteps. And he also follows in the footsteps of Athena many times in the Odyssey. And in a procession for the Panathenaea, for example, the young girls, the marriage-age girls would have been at the front leading the procession. So lots of precedents, both in myth and in ritual in the historic time. And this is what's happening with Nausicaa. So what we're getting is essentially an initiation of a maiden. She's participating in a ritual. She's washed, which is a purification. She's done a choral dance with her handmaidens. They've thrown a ball. That's part of it. And by standing her ground and facing Odysseus, she is moving from being a member of the chorus to being the leader. So very much coded as an initiation moment. And I will say that before she leaves her home, there is a clanging noise made by the mules, which is the same word that is used for, as Katerina, I've discussed with her before, which is the sound that's made at the beginning of a ritual to indicate that a ritual is beginning. So really everything in this scene is very, very loaded. And once again, does it mean we can't enjoy it as a piece of literature? No, but we also have to understand that there's something really enriching and enlivening about being able to see the depth and importance of this young girl. She is hugely important because she will be the one to continue the community through, again, marriage and all of these things that we might kind of think of as not important, but for them were of utmost importance. So there is a goodbye scene with Nausicaa and Odysseus. And in this scene where they say goodbye, something very slightly unexpected maybe, right? Where she says to him, when you go home, pray to me. Pray to me because you owe your life to me. I feel that there is a level of cyclical meaning here because she will carry his story, but she's also asking him to carry her story. And Odysseus agrees. He says, when I go home, when I reach my home and see my return, I will pray to you as to a goddess, because you kept me alive. And then he calls her Kore, which means maiden, daughter. And then he sits down with Alcinous. So again, on the surface, it's kind of this poignant farewell scene. She's bringing their narrative to a close. But when we look at it in this embedded context, what we see is that Nausicaa asks for memory, for kleos. Kleos memory, sing a song about me, remember me, pray to me, instead of a marriage. That's what she's asking Odysseus for. She's asking for kleos. So there's a little bit of a reversal of a trajectory from Andromache and Hector, where Andromache ends asserting the importance of ritual by initiating a lament in her home, and Nausicaa is asking for heroic status, for kleos status. So again, we're constantly coming face to face with circles, cyclicality. Penelope is a little bit of a combination because Penelope, and this is a scene from book 18, that should say 19, book 19, where she is describing to Odysseus, who is in disguise, she's describing to him about how she stalled the suitors. So she basically sings her own kleos. She sings her own fame. She said, those suitors, they wanted me to marry them, but I spun a web and I trapped them for 7 years. But then I was betrayed. I was betrayed by my maidens. And they caught me and they made me complete it. And the end of one weaving, it simply initiates the beginning of another. So she's going to have to spin a new scheme, which she does with the contest of the bow. Whether you see it that way, I think, in large part, is going to be dependent on, are you reading the surface? Well, Penelope doesn't know that it's Odysseus because the bard never tells us that she knows, so she must not know. And this is a big debate, right? How early does Penelope know? And I think if you are kind of looking at it from a myth ritual context, you're going to say she knows right from the beginning. How's she not going to recognize her husband? Telemachus knows. Right? It's very fun to read their exchanges, Telemachus and Penelope's exchanges, with the myth ritual kind of in your mind. And I think you'll see there's a reality maybe on the surface that's hiding something underneath. And I think Homer is training us how to read him, actually. So on the surface, Penelope's weaving is a clever trick. She's showing that she longs for Odysseus. She's telling him, against the grain, right? Looking at it under the surface, Penelope's weaving is actually controlling time. And it's allowing her not to transition. Rather than moving time forward and her having to transition into the wife of another man, she's actually she's stopping it. She's putting it on pause. And she's creating fame for herself. But the fame is through ritual endurance, through continually weaving, unweaving, and reweaving. So it really very, love Penelope. Then we have the reunion of Penelope and Odysseus. And again, we can look at the bed test. Like if you're, I assume, does everybody have knowledge of the Odyssey? Right. So at the very end of the Odyssey, Penelope says, I don't know if it's really you. And again, if we look at it on the surface, she just doesn't know yet. She's not sure. If we look at her as the paradigm of ritual endurance, then we can say she's ensuring that all the rituals are followed properly. And he cannot be allowed to, she can't make any assumptions. He's got to go through the motions. He's got to speak to her about the bed, which we are told is alive because the bed is made from a tree that is still living. To contrast with trees that are felled to make new things in the Iliad, warriors are trees who fall. Their marriage is a tree that endures, a tree that lives. And again, we could see it as an object of ritual permanence. And it's reinforcing marriage and family as a rooted institution, a living institution, and the institution that ensures continuity. And Penelope is ensuring that that household is restored properly. So Andromache, maybe there's an assertion of ritual importance. Nausicaa, there's an assertion of the importance of fame, kleos, fame. And Penelope is kind of both, I think, right? The two together. Okay, yeah. I think we're okay on time. Are we okay on time? Yeah.
Another 5 minutes?
Perfect, yes. So what I'd like you to do, right, is two things before we end. One is I just want to point out that we often see, and there's been some scholarly suggestion that women in historical time would not have known about Homer. They wouldn't have known about the myths. Yes, I see some faces being made. And correct, I think that's true. I don't understand how they would weave the story of, for example, the Titanomachy without knowing the myths, right? And early on, Homer was all of epic, not just the Iliad and Odyssey. That's more of a later decision that's made on the part of different people. But I just want to point out that if we think about the myth ritual context, it really can transform not only our understanding of Homer, but also of tragedy. And so I wanted to just, I keep forgetting. Sorry. I just want to point out in Hecuba, in Ion, in Iphigenia at Taurus, Euripides' tragedies, we often see women being connected to storytelling through weaving. And so I do sort of invite you to keep an eye out for those things when they pop up, and just see if thinking about them maybe gives you a different way of thinking about the stories themselves and the idea that the story is making reality. And then for the last thing that I want to share with you, the barley grinder in book 20. Does anyone remember the barley grinder? Yeah, we don't even remember the barley grinder. She does not have a name. She's just a minor detail. She's just an enslaved woman working away, and we overlook her. But she actually is the one who utters the prophecy, who projects, who makes Odysseus succeed, because she speaks the wish that he will be restored and that the suitors will be defeated. So it's very poetic, I think, that we don't even remember her in the story, but she, in the context of the myth ritual complex, is the clearest, loudest voice of ritual endurance. Because she's grinding the grain, a thankless task that has to be done. How else are you going to bake the cakes that you're dedicating if you don't have grain, right? And she says, the bard tells us she's the most powerless, and yet she speaks directly to Zeus. Father Zeus, you who rule gods and humans, you thundered loudly from the star-filled sky. She heard the thunder. She understood that it was an omen from Zeus, that it was a signal from Zeus. Though no clouds are in sight, she gets it. She's attuned. She's paying attention. You made this marvel appear for someone. Bring to pass now the words that I would say. So this is a optative, and so it's a wish, an expression of a wish, but it's also in the imperative. Make this happen. So then she says, let this be the last day the suitors take a lovely feast in the great room of Odysseus. Let them have their last meal. And that's exactly what happens on that day. So her prayer is the one that's going to correct the imbalance, that will allow Penelope's ruse to be fulfilled the way that will restore the family. So the most important, and Odysseus overhears her make this prayer, and he recognizes it as a signal that he's going to succeed, or that he takes it, he's emboldened by it, he's excited by it. So yeah, the most important and the least important are united. And I think that's also hand drawing hand a little bit, right? They rely on each other. We might not think that way, but I think the ancient Greeks are thinking, you might think she's the most powerless, but let me show you something, right? He's showing us that maybe she's not as powerless as we think she is. So parting image, to complement our starting image, what do we notice? On the left-hand side, Penelope and Telemachus. Penelope is sitting, again, not a scene from the Odyssey, but clearly evoking the story. There's Penelope seated, grieving by her weaving. Telemachus standing with a spear, signifying that men, their protective capacity is predominantly through war and counsel, and women's through weaving and care and ritual. And then we can see that the mast and the loom and the mast and the loom both have standing beams. They both have cloths running horizontally. And just a very fun closing thought, loom, the word for loom in ancient Greek is histos. The word for mast in ancient Greek is also histos. So there's this sense of gender balance, equivalent authorities, separate spheres, but equivalent authorities. Thank you so much.